So one of my favorite channels that talks about Israel and understanding the Bible from that perspective is Expedition Bible, run by Joel Kramer. He's an amazing archaeologist and has written an amazing book as well if you want to check that out. But we're going to look at his channel today and talk specifically about the tomb of Lazarus. There's actually a good chance that we know exactly where it is. So let's check out Joel's video and see exactly what he says about it right here.
I am in Al-Azaria, which preserves the ancient biblical name of Lazarus, and this is where the tomb of Lazarus is located.
Is there archaeological evidence that the traditional tomb of Lazarus is authentic?
So why does he say this? Why does he say, is there archaeological evidence that the traditional tomb of Lazarus is authentic? Okay, so there's a big thing that you have to understand when it comes to Israel in general, okay? Israel has a ton and some duplicates of traditional sites. So for example, you'll go to the traditional site of the feeding of the 5,000. This is a place where they believe it could have happened or that it did happen. Now, a lot of these are based on word of mouth kind of tellings of these places over time. Some of these places, these are the places that happened, such as Mount Carmel or Jerusalem, right? These are locations that cannot change. But random places like where the feeding of the 5,000 took place, you can't really tell for sure this is the exact location, right? But there are a lot of traditional spots where they kind of think it happened here, but you cannot say for 100% certainty that it did. So he's asking, is the traditional spot for the tomb of Lazarus actually, the tomb of Lazarus? And he's saying that there's a pretty good chance that it is. So let's check this out. This is so cool for sure. I love that it's just like this random little hole in the side of the wall. We're going to learn about more about this little group here in a second. This is like a funeral procession here. And if you hear me turning down the music, it's just because some music can get copyright claimed by YouTube, and that's super, super annoying for sure. Oh, by the way, thank you very much, Kathy. I appreciate you so much. You rule. Thank you for that $10. You're amazing, amazing, amazing. If anybody does want to give during this live stream, or if you're watching this video after the fact, you can click the little money symbol or the little super thanks button, which is like a heart with a little money symbol in it, and that will go directly to us as a donation. So thank you so much. You rock. Thank you, Kathy. Expedition Bible, very epic. One of my favorite channels by far.
The most famous tomb on earth is where Jesus rose from the dead, just outside of the AD 1st century city of Jerusalem. However, just to the east of Jerusalem is the Mount of Olives. And situated on the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives was the town of Bethany.
So keep this in mind. He's going to show you a lot of maps in this video, but keep in mind exactly where these locations are. It's going to help you understand the stories in the Bible, okay?
And further to the east, on the outskirts of Bethany, was another famous tomb, because of the event that took place there almost 2,000 years ago. John chapter 11 says, "Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany. After Lazarus died, Jesus came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. 'Take away the stone,' he said. 'But Lord,' said Martha, the sister of the dead man, 'by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days.' They took away the stone. Jesus called out in a loud voice, 'Lazarus, come out!' The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, 'Take off the grave clothes and let him go.'" This view looks west, with Bethany in the foreground and Jerusalem in the background. This cluster of commemorative buildings marks the location of the tomb of Lazarus. Excavations began here in 1949. Just to the west is the location of the ancient town of Bethany. Excavations began here in 19...
It's so cool to me that like these places like exist, that like you can see them, right? Like so many people have a problem with Christianity because you can't taste and see. Like you can't know that you know that you know. But the truth is that if you look for the evidence, it is there, you know? And so it's so interesting to me to see these things and just to be able to tangibly think about Christianity instead of having it be a spiritual exercise, right? Which is what a lot of us feel like, and a lot of Christian kind of antagonists will use that against us, and it's really, really interesting.
1951. West of Bethany is the top of the Mount of Olives, and on the other side the Dome of the Rock is seen on the ancient Temple Mount, where at the time of Jesus and Lazarus, the temple stood. So this is the excavation report of the archaeologist Sylvester Soller, which took place in Bethany between 1949 and 1953. Reading through this excavation report, I was disappointed because Soller doesn't really discuss the tomb itself. Isn't the point the tomb? But then over time I started realizing, oh, this is the excavations at Bethany. And one thing that Soller did not excavate was the tomb. He couldn't excavate the tomb because it was never buried. Because it was visited over the course of 2,000 years, and the event that took place there was never forgotten. And therefore, you can't find something that's not lost, and you can't excavate something that was never buried.
This is such a good point. Like, that is one of the major points in this video. Super, super good.
Soller's drawings, the position of the tomb of Lazarus is shown in yellow, and the walls attached to it, cut out of the bedrock, are shown in brown. Today, these lie beneath a roofed building.
So here I am at the tomb of Lazarus. I'm standing in an ancient cave. The Bible specifically says that the tomb of Lazarus was in a cave. You can see right here, a line right here, as well as a line right here. This was the original entrance into the cave that was blocked up later in history. Okay, so this place has been venerated for almost 2,000 years, so as expected, it's been modified many, many times. You see these later walls that have been built here and an arched roof in this chamber. But if you look in these patches where these later walls are not preserved, then you see the walls of the original cave back behind them.
So in about AD 330, the early church historian Eusebius visits the tomb of Lazarus. He writes, "Lazarus' place is still shown there." And this is evidence that shows that the tradition, the belief that this was Lazarus' tomb is very old.
Yeah, so this is like a key point in the video, okay? So this place has been venerated for 2,000 years. So since the point of Lazarus resurrecting, this place has been kept and visited and known, right? That's why this is so important. Because this is not a place that has been lost to time and then we had to go find it. This is a place that has been visited since it happened. And why would that be the case? If we think about Lazarus, right? In John chapter 11, Lazarus is resurrected, right? This is before Jesus goes into the city, before the triumphal entry, before Holy Week, before all this stuff happens, right? The reason why this is so important is because Lazarus is the last straw that breaks the camel's back for the Sadducees and for all the people that are trying to kill Jesus. After he resurrects Lazarus, Jesus' fame increases exponentially because the people see a man that was dead amongst them. And so not only do they want to kill Jesus, but they want to kill Lazarus to get rid of this proof of resurrection, which everybody is seeing. So, of course, this tomb is so important because this is the thing that really exponentially grew Jesus' ministry and really made it so that so many people started coming to him. And you can read about that in the scriptures. It's very clear there as well. Real quick, if you're thinking to yourself right now, man, I really need to go to Israel. Well, you're right. And I genuinely think that you should. We have an annual Israel trip every single year that I try to make as affordable as I possibly can. 2024 is almost fully booked. We only have a few spots left if you want to sneak in there, but 2025 is wide open. So shoot me an email at this email right here, and we'll get you all the information when we're ready to plan that trip. Anyway, we'd love to see you over there, and I think that you really need to think about this. Let's continue on with the video.
It goes back far before Eusebius, because he's amazed that by his time, 300 years after the event, it's still being pointed out there, it's still being shown. Well, we can say the same thing today, 1,700 years after Eusebius visited the site. We can say to this day, it's still being shown to people as the tomb of Lazarus. Why was it never forgotten? It says in verse 45 that many Jews who had seen what Jesus did believed in him. This makes sense then for why the tomb was never forgotten, because The event itself caused many Jews to believe, many locals to believe in Jesus, and therefore Christians were represented in the local population from the time of the event until today. And they did not forget the amazing miracle that happened there and where it happened. Another thing that gives credibility to the traditional tomb of Lazarus being the authentic tomb is its context. It is just to the east of the village that Solar discovered and excavated, which he identified as Bethany, because the description of the location of Bethany in the Bible is a match for the ruins that Solar excavated. Being on the backside of the Mount of Olives, being on the road that comes up from Jericho to Jerusalem, and being located less than 2 miles from Jerusalem. John 11:18 says, Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem. Bethania, wrote Eusebius, is a village at the second milestone from Aelia, that is Jerusalem, on the flank of the Mount of Olives, where Christ raised Lazarus. Seen here is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Less than 2 miles to the east is ancient Bethany. This is where Solar excavated. A little further east is the tomb of Lazarus.
Okay, so this is...
It's just so cool to think about, like just thinking about how all of that worked during the time. There was none of those buildings were there. Like all the towns were so small. Most of it was wilderness. Like just such a different feel back in the first century, I'm sure.
Is the ancient route that's coming up here from Jericho on the eastern side of the Mount of Olives to Jerusalem on the western side of the Mount of Olives. You can't go this route today because there's the modern wall, and you see this burned gate here is blocking off the Jerusalem side of the Mount of Olives from the Bethany side of the Mount of Olives. This location fits perfectly the village that was found in the excavations in the early 1900s just to the west of the tomb of Lazarus.
So Bethany itself was excavated.
Yeah, and it makes so much sense in Jewish culture too, because the tomb would be outside of the city. They would never have a tomb inside of the city unless it was for a king, right? Which we talked about last time. We're going to talk about a little bit again today, talking about David in a bit here.
Thoroughly, and the houses were found, and the occupation of the site was found. It was occupied from the Persian period up through the early Roman period, the time of Jesus and Lazarus, the time of the event.
Okay, so I don't know who's been digging in this area, but you can see some of the stones that have been uncovered. There's a lot of first century pottery. You can see the edge of a wall here, probably a house wall.
This is what I'm talking about, dude. Like he's in some random area over here. Of course, they're doing some digging, archaeological digging, but he's just like in this random area in the middle of Bethany, like the ancient city of Bethany, and he's just like, oh, here's some ancient first century pottery. Here's like a wall from a first century ruin. Like, like it's just so crazy what is underneath the feet of everybody in Israel. It's insane.
That's running in this line. And so this is the area that is just west of the tomb of Lazarus. This is where they were excavating in the early 1950s, where they found the town of Bethany itself, where Lazarus and his sisters Mary and Martha were from. And now it's covered with modern buildings, so you can't see much of the area, but there's this patch in between the buildings, and I can see some of the archaeological evidence dating back to AD 1st century, the time of Jesus and Lazarus.
So crazy.
The tomb of Lazarus is located under this roof. This is the entrance from the street level. Solar could not excavate directly east of the tomb, because during the Islamic period, this mosque was built with its minaret. Where Solar excavated was east of this mosque. Before this modern church was built over the site, the apse of an earlier church was visible here. This is where Solar began his excavations. Looking down on these buildings, we see the location of the tomb of Lazarus. The apse to the east was excavated, and the church it belonged to uncovered. Below it was a second church, and below it was another church. This was the deepest, and therefore the oldest church.
So there's like 5 churches built on top of each other in this area where the tomb is, giving us more proof, more evidence, more understanding that this is legit, that this is actually the tomb of Lazarus that goes back 2,000 years of evidence. It's insane.
Dating to the AD 300s.
So AD 300, so 300 years after Lazarus is resurrected, right? We see a church appearing here, meaning that at least by that time, and we see this by Eusebius as well, which is the historian that he talks about earlier, also talks about how during this time he knew that people went here and they visited the tomb of Lazarus. This was like a tourist attraction already by 300 after the time of Christ. So like this is something that is so close, like so close.
Later, a fourth church from the Crusader period was discovered that was built right over the tomb. And then a fifth church was built over the stack of archaeology, which is still in use today.
So behind me here is the stack of 5 churches, all commemorating the event that happened almost 2,000 years ago here when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead.
Soller called the oldest church the first church, then the second church above it. Then came the third church, the fourth church, and the fifth church.
So we can see the different archaeological layers of the floor here preserved in patch.
This is really, really cool. So they call this like, I don't know if this would be considered a tell. I guess not, because tells are normally like cities that are kind of destroyed and then built on one another. So in Israel, when you go to Israel, you see a bunch of different places such as Tel Megiddo or different locations. These are basically mounds of earth that are built up over time because it's a location of a city that over time, these cities get destroyed and then rebuilt and destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed and rebuilt on top of each other. So these different civilizations, you can begin to see the layers. So in a very similar sense, you're seeing these churches here that are built on top of one another, and you're seeing layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, layer 5, all built on top of one another. And you can see the evidence of that, which is really, really cool.
So here is the floor level from the third church. This is the floor level underneath it, preserved from the second church. And then just over here, we have a preserved layer from the first church.
So cool.
Several patches of the mosaics of the first church can still be seen at the site today. For example, this one.
This is a mosaic from the first church, the oldest church.
And this one.
Again, that's not just like a random mosaic. It's a mosaic from 300 AD, like super old.
Here we have a series of pillars and capitals, bases that are preserved from the ancient churches that stood in this place.
In the Islamic period, the mosque was built over what previously was the courtyard of the earlier churches.
So churches were built there first. There was an Islamic period where Muslims came in and destroyed the church and built a mosque on top of it.
Locked. Okay, so I am in the mosque. So this is the courtyard that separated the church from the tomb of Lazarus. And I'm going to get out of here before I get in serious trouble.
Dude, this guy's so brave. I would not be that brave to try to just sneak into a mosque. Not my kind of fun, for sure.
In the Crusader church, the original entrance to the cave was blocked up, and the tomb was entered from the street level by stairs. This remains the way the tomb is currently entered. So the evidence is very, very strong for this being the authentic tomb of Lazarus. You have the town of Bethany that was found and excavated, which is occupied at the time of the event. You have other tombs in the vicinity that date to the same time period, the early Roman period, as the tomb itself that's being commemorated. You have this stack of archaeological layers that are commemorating this as the tomb of Lazarus. You have the historical event recorded in the Bible that fits.
The crazy thing to me is, like, if this was anything else, right? Like, if this was anything else other than a scriptural person talking about resurrection, everybody would be like, yeah, for sure. Like, there's no problem with me looking at this evidence and seeing that it's true. But because it's a scriptural event, people are going to dismiss everything, right? And dismiss all the evidence that they have here of this being a tomb from the first century that was used during the first century, that 5 churches were built on top of from the time of 300 AD, having all of this information that's here, having people telling you, historians telling you from 300 AD and earlier, that people visited this tomb since the time of Lazarus. Like, there's so much evidence here, but because it's a biblical event, people dismiss it, right? People will kind of not listen to the truth here. This is the kind of stuff that really solidifies my faith, right? And I see these things and it's like, no, I see the evidence over and over and over and over and over again. And there's nothing that's been found in Israel that goes, that part of your Bible is just not right. Like, that doesn't happen. Like, they may think that for a few decades, but then they find something that clarifies it again, right? So it's just, I don't know, it's just so beautiful, so cool.
lists the description and location of the site, and you have the extra biblical mentions that also help us understand that all of this together represents strong evidence that this is the tomb where Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. I was taking a shot of the entrance from street level of the tomb, and I was thinking to myself, wow, this is a boring shot. There's nothing happening here. And then I heard something, and I looked through my camera lens, and I saw these palm branches coming up the street, and behind them was this crowd, and I realized this is a funeral. And so my shot all of a sudden became very inspired, because literally a dead body passed between my camera and the tomb of Lazarus.
Yeah, such a coincidence.
And it just hit me that everything's pretty much the same. The problem is the same. The need that people have is the same. The need that we have is a solution to death.
So good. This is so good.
The biblical solution to death is not that we don't die. The Bible says that the grave is the destiny of everyone. Rather, the solution to death in the Bible is resurrection. And more specifically, it is Jesus, because the one who was raised from the dead is also the one who raises the dead. And so the reason that people kept visiting this tomb over the course of 2,000 years is because it represented to them hope. They were connecting what had happened to Lazarus in the past to what was going to happen to them in the future.
Yep.
A good example of this is when Jesus is approaching the tomb of Lazarus, Martha, Lazarus' sister, comes out to meet him, and to comfort her, he says to her, "Your brother will rise again." And she answers Jesus by saying, I know that he will rise at the resurrection at the last day.
Yeah, because up until this point, like, Jesus had talked about the resurrection. The Jewish people believed in this resurrection that was to come. However, this was just a theory until now, right? Like, they had never seen it in person like this. And so it's such a different thing when you see it in front of you.
And Jesus says to her, I am the resurrection and the life. So when I think about it for myself personally, Jesus is so much greater than me that sometimes he's hard for me to relate to. He's God in flesh. How do I relate to that? He's sinless. How do I relate to that? But Lazarus, well, Lazarus I can relate to because he's a man just like me.
Yep.
And so I know that unless Jesus comes back first, I know that I, like Lazarus, will die. I, like Lazarus, will enter the grave. But I can enter the grave like Lazarus did in relationship with Christ. Just as Lazarus needed Jesus to call him out of the grave, so in the future, I need Jesus to call me out of my grave. To me, the tomb of Lazarus is like a monument of archaeological evidence that demonstrates hope. So if you enjoyed this content, then you might...
Yeah, so cool. Definitely go check out his channel if you haven't already. Some of my favorite content on the internet right here, for sure. Love his stuff. Joel Kramer, check out Expedition Bible for sure. Super, super good. Love that stuff. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. If you haven't already, check out our Israel trips that are coming up. I'm planning our 2025 trip right now. If you're interested, go ahead and contact me. I'll put my email in the chat. It's contact@mysnipesolutions.com. You just watched a segment from our weekly live stream that we do every Sunday night at 6:30. If you want to watch the full 3-hour live stream, you can go over to patreon.com/thesnipelife or hit that link in the description down below to sign up over there. We'd love to see you over there. There's a ton of extra content, and I'm sure you're going to love it. All right, we'll see you on the next one. Peace.